Hey everybody, I wanted to talk to you just for a moment about this concept of writing original worship songs in the church today. Things culturally have been shifting in a lot of ways recently with distribution and methods of getting marketing, songs getting out into the world, and it's changed a whole lot in the industry of worship. No longer is Nashville the only gatekeeper for getting songs out to the world. And I think it's actually a beautiful thing that churches are rising up, beginning to write their own sounds, their own songs, and that these songs are even going past their worlds and into the charts, which is amazing. And it seems like a new thing, a new shift that's been happening. But I assure you, it's actually a very old thing. If you look back over history, at the ancient church, that's all the church knew was their own songs and maybe the Psalms, right? And so it's actually a beautiful thing of the past coming back into the now. And I think it's important that the church is getting her voice back. The first reason why I think it's really important that we include these songs in our worship sets is because it brings fresh praise and fresh revelation. I want to read this Psalm 96, 1-2, and it says this: Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord all the earth. Sing to the Lord, praise his name, proclaim his salvation day after day. And I want to pause right there because that's really, really important to notice that the Lord really knew that we would have Psalms for centuries, and he found it so important for us not only to remember those old songs, but the new songs, so much so that he tucked Sing a New Song into the old songs over and over and over again so that we wouldn't forget. And you might remember in the New Testament, there's a verse that talks about psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. And at that time, it's believed that the psalms were obviously the old historic ancient songs that they had. The hymns were ways for them to teach things in the church in their context. It was a teaching of some sort. And then the spiritual songs were the new songs. So even in the New Testament, it shows a balance. And if we're going to forget anything in our services, usually it's the new songs. But I just wanted to remind you, new songs are actually so important that they're tucked away many times in the old songs. The second reason why I feel like original worship songs are so important to the church is because they go beyond language and they actually speak the dialect of your church. Now, if you can't tell, I have a northern accent. I grew up in Michigan, and so that's why I talk the way that I do. I've been in Tennessee for quite some time, but I do remember a couple things that made me laugh regarding dialect. One is my son, when he was riding in the back of the car one time, I think I said the word calendar, and he asked me if I was from another country. And I said, pretty much, son, pretty much. But I was in Target another day, and it was very surprising to me. I was getting ready to go to the fitting rooms to try something on. And the lady that was sitting there at the desk said one or two words to me, a few things, a couple phrases maybe. And by the way that she spoke, she sounded like my mother tongue. And I said to her, where are you from? And she said, I'm from Allegan, Michigan, which it just happens to be my hometown. And I couldn't believe that my ear was that tuned that I could hear someone from my hometown all the way down here in Tennessee, 10 hours away from that hometown. But if we look at the day of Pentecost, this is another great example of how dialect really matters. Here's what it says, Acts 2:6. And when this sound rang out, the crowd came together in bewilderment because each one heard them speaking in his own language. And later in that chapter, Peter goes on to say that 3,000 came to believe that day. And that was because they all heard in their mother tongue. It's really important. Recently, during one of my two-way journaling sessions with the Lord, he was speaking to me about the grandeur of his sovereignty and about how he created the universe. And he basically said, if those were the only things that I talked to you about, you would know me as God. But when I show you the tiny details, when I show you in a million different ways of confirmation, Or when I show you these little tiny things that only I would know about you, when those things come up, then you know me as Father. And I believe the same is true of our worship songs. I believe He wants us to put those intricate things in for our congregations where they know Him as Father. Did you know that your church has its own dialect? It really does. And it's funny to me how sometimes there's arguments regarding one line of a song that's been written, and churches won't sing it because of the one line, or they want to change it. It just is a good reminder that you have the opportunity to write those songs that'll perfectly fit your dialect and your theology, and songs that will totally go hand in hand with what your pastor's preaching. So anyways, that is another reason why worship songs that are written specifically for your church are so important. You can say things with nuances that can't be heard any other way. The third reason why original worship songs are so important to the church is because it brings unity to the congregation and to the staff. And this can be seen in many different ways, but just it keeps a conversation going during the week, if you let it, between the pastor and the worship leader, or whoever the writers are in that church, about what is the Lord doing? What is He saying to us? What? He said that to you? That's confirmation, because I heard the same thing this morning. And when we can have conversations before Sunday, before the message is given, then you can put those two messages hand in hand to the point where the music will actually be the melody that carries the message past a Sunday. So while it is awesome and beautiful to hear a message from the Lord, and it's also wonderful to hear a message through song, but just think about the impact of when those two things can come together and that message is the same message, and how much farther that could carry because of that unity. I recently have been writing with a church in Nashville called Crosspoint Church, and there was a phrase that somebody said in the church that was so moving to a lot of the members there. This gentleman had ALS. He was a football player, and he said one phrase, and that phrase caught our hearts when we sat down to write with their team. And the song was finished. The pastor had a message prepared for Sunday morning, but when he heard that song, and when he heard the message in that song, he actually scrapped his entire message for Sunday and wrote his message based on that song. And I have to say, it's one of the most moving, impactful services I've ever been to in my life. The fourth reason why I love using original worship in congregational settings is that it allows you to address sometimes what's happening in the past or the present, what your church has experienced, and it allows you to minister to those things. So sometimes churches go through trials as a whole. Sometimes it might be an individual in the church that's going through something tough, but it ripples throughout the whole church. And you really can address those things or speak to those things through song in different ways than you can in spoken word. Songs have the ability to gently bring healing over a melody that's delivered, and then also it's accepted in a beautiful place many times. And it has more of an impact. And I don't always understand why, but it's true. And so if there's anything happening in your church now, just be thinking about that. How can I write something towards what we're walking through as a church? But it's also the true in the opposite way, which is when a church is experiencing victory, when you've just gotten into a new building, when you have a new pastor, when you're excited about a new season, when you've seen someone healed. All of those things are reasons to celebrate. And I actually don't think that we celebrate those types of victories enough through song. I think that's something we need a whole lot more of. And when we look at the Old Testament, when we think about the crossing of the Red Sea, for instance, the very first thing that happened when their feet hit that dry ground on the other side of the sea was Miriam picked up her tambourine and she led in a song of praise. And We need more Miriams today in our churches to be rising up when there's something to celebrate and to lead others in actually singing it. A while back, I wrote a song called Back to Life, and it was really inspired by my daughter, who had been going through a lot of anxiety. And I was a little nervous when we got to doing it with our congregation, because while it was a congregational worship song, it was a little different. It got a little bold in some of the lyrics. So the bridge says, resentment, depression, and all anxiety have no power over me. What else does it say? Here it is. Addictions, strongholds, and every disease have no power over me. And those were words I'd never used in a worship song before, so I was kind of nervous. But when we did it, the very first Sunday, we had 6 or 7 people come up afterwards and say, where can I get that depression song? So be aware of what people are experiencing in your congregation, because a lot of times it's the very same thing that you yourself are. And you have a great opportunity to speak healing through song and also to sing about victories. And finally, the 5th reason that I think original worship songs are important to the church today is because they prepare us for the future. Sometimes they tell us what's to come. I was so excited recently as I was researching prophets in the Bible when I came to realize that a lot of them were also songwriters. So the prophets in your church very well may be sitting on your worship team. There was a song I wrote not too long ago with Crosspoint Church, which is a church here in Nashville. And their pastor had been preaching a lot about revival and believing for that for their church, and had not yet seen it in its fullness, but we decided how awesome would it be to put that in a song. And so there's a song called Watch What He Will Do. And the bridge says, you better get ready for the miracle. You better get ready for the joy. You better get ready for revival. It's coming. So even in that bridge, we're preparing that church for what God has for them in the future. There was also another song recently written with a friend called Fighting for Us. And while we were thinking about one of the congregants as we were writing the song and her battle with cancer, as well as some other things, and realizing that that song would mean something to her when she was fighting, we had no idea that she would actually go to heaven, and then it would be her family left behind and the rest of the congregation that would need to be singing that song in her remembrance, and knowing that right then in that situation, the Lord was still with us, fighting for us. But we didn't know that when we wrote the song. And a lot of times that's how it works with these types of songs that the Holy Spirit gives or initiates. It really is sometimes a message we don't even know we need until later on. So write those songs because they will prepare your church for the future. I started songwriting when I was 5 years old. I've been really thankful to get some of my songs recorded by some artists that I've really loved over the years, including Natalie Grant, Mandisa, Corey Voss, Michael Farron, Dustin Smith, Phillips Craig and Dean, Anthony Evans, who slays Mercy Tree. What I love about this course is it takes all the experience from writing in Nashville and it moves it outside of the city. So you do not need to move here in order to experience and learn and understand how to write songs in your hometown, in your home church, for purposes there in that place where you are right now. You can gain experience from here, but it can come directly to you where you are. This course is for anybody that wants to write songs for the love and for the joy of worship.